So welcome everyone. Welcome to our virtual conference, Sustainability for a Global Food Industry in a Global Pandemic. So with the pandemic's far-reaching implications in the food supply, more than ever, sustainability is top of mind for both businesses and consumers. From food origin and transparency to customer experience and demands, the global food system is highly complex and interlinked. The complexity of food growing, handling, processing, distributing, retailing, food service, home preparation, and disposal, plus all of the workers involved at each step, has had a spotlight shone on it due to the pandemic. COVID-19 had raised issues about food self-reliance in Canada and other individual countries. As we embrace the idea of circular economy, what does that mean for the global food industry during a global pandemic? Understand from health expert Jane Dummer today with us the basic of a circular economy in the food industry and how the global pandemic is providing challenges, but also opportunities to improvement in the adaptability and sustainability of our food system that will continue to evolve. There are thousands of self-proclaimed foodies positioning themselves as health and wellness expert, but Jane Dummer is the real deal. She's a respected thought leader in the food industry with credentials as a registered dietitian and has a nutrition science degree from one of the world's top leading food universities. She consults with medium to large food and beverage companies across North America and is a frequent guest and commentator in the media circuit with over 100 interviews. She speaks in front of strategic audiences, including key clients, industry, health professionals, and consumers. She's also the author of The Need for Seeds, How to Make Seeds and Everyday Food in Your Healthy Diet. And she's also a writer for Baker's Journal and member of the College Dietitian of Ontario. She has also served on scientific advisory boards for Danone Canada and the Canadian Foundation of Dietetic Research. She's been our health expert for the past years. We're very happy to have her again with us this year. And Jane, the floor is now yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Beatrice, for that introduction. And I'd like to introduce Cheryl, who is part of my team, and she'll be online with us today. And she'll be collecting the questions. And so there's going to be 2 question periods throughout my presentation. And so I'll alert you as they're coming up, but please, as we go along, write your questions in the Q&A box. Please avoid putting your questions in the chat because we'll be really monitoring the Q&A. So thank you for joining us today, this morning. I'm hoping you're enjoying the SIAL conference or the SIAL show, and I'm looking forward to presenting to you right now. So the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about sustainability and a circular economy in the food industry. And as I mentioned, Cheryl's helping out with moderating the questions for me, and so I'll have a question period after that. And then what does the global food pandemic mean for a circular economy and a global food industry? So, and then we'll have questions on that. And then I'll wrap up with final insights. And my understanding is, as usual, this presentation is being recorded, and it will be available on SIAL's YouTube channel soon after, I'll just say soon after I present. So probably within 24 hours of my presentation today. So sustainability in the food industry. So when we look at the global pandemic, it has really increased scrutiny on the food system. So there was, you know, when it was announced that we were in a global pandemic, there was hoarding, panic buying. We did see some fragile situations within our food system because of that situation. Also, we did see imports that, because of border closings, were no longer available. So I thought it'd be interesting, prior to the pandemic, you know, I was going to talk about sustainability at SIAL in April anyway, and then when the pandemic hit, I thought I would shift this presentation to include what has happened since the pandemic. So with the pandemic's far-reaching implications in the food supply, more than ever, we need to look at the entire life cycle. So not just a linear approach, but more of a circular approach. So we know the complexity of food growing, handling, processing, distributing, retail, food service, home prep, disposal. It is a bit of a beast when we look at it from, you know, my tagline is pod to plate, you know, gate to plate, farm to fork. When we look at each step involved and the workers involved, and during the pandemic, we have definitely seen a spotlight shone on the different steps, and maybe the steps that aren't as resilient as we had hoped they would have been. So this is providing challenges, but also opportunities for improvement and adaptability and sustainability of our food system. And that image of me with Jesus, a California strawberry grower, that was taken a few years ago. And, you know, as Canadians, we are used to citrus fruit and exotic fruit basically all year round, but that does come at a cost. And so I'll talk a little bit about consumers and consumers' expectations, and how the mind shift of consumers, or the mindset of consumers, has to shift moving forward. So consumers are looking at the whole picture, especially during the global health crisis, and consider how biodiversity, we hear a lot about animal health, especially in social media. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. Also human health, energy and water use. And again, energy, water, land use, sometimes the information is correct, sometimes it's not. So we'll talk again a little bit about that and how to measure that and have accurate information. However, consumers more than ever are concerned about all these inputs and these factors with their healthy dietary plans. So, you know, people are maybe adopting more plant-based eating and based on information that they feel is accurate. But we'll, and again, clarify that a little bit later. But they are, because of social media, because of access to information, consumers more than ever want accurate information. Well, again, maintaining a healthy dietary plan, but also food safety and reducing the risk of COVID spreads. So consumers now have a lot on their mind. Prior to the pandemic, you know, certainly they were looking at different dietary plans, which one was healthier for both human and land and animal. But now we're not only concerned about that, and food safety was always, you know, always a concern with global food production and local food production. But now more than ever, because we have a virus that we don't have a proven protocol for recovery, and we're trying to do our best with our measures for spread. Consumers, again, have this on their mind, and I think it's a really good opportunity to not only shift practices, but shift education, or put a focus on education. So when we're looking at sustainability, and I'll talk about sustainability kind of versus this circular economy, and sustainability is, you know, it's a word used across many different types of industries. Within the food industry, there is definitely an emphasis put on agriculture. There should be more of an emphasis put on employees across all pieces of the food value chain. The supply chain. So as I mentioned earlier, from the farmer to the retailer to the home consumer, it is big, and that has happened over the past 100 years. It has increased dramatically. And then there's consumers. So consumers, you know, they may say they want sustainability in a certain environment, yet they're using more like home delivery for food and groceries. And I know right now, because of the pandemic, that might seem wise, but you know, that's putting more cars on the road and more frequency of those cars on the road. So sometimes when we're looking at consumers and how to educate them, it's important to make sure that they understand all inputs of sustainability, and it's, you know, maybe just not on food waste or not just purchasing from local. So The idea of a circular economy considers the entire food value chain and the economies within it. So whereas sustainability might be more isolated to the specific farm or the specific business or the specific institution, the idea of a circular economy is the food origin and transparency. With the consumer demands, we're looking at a global food system. So it's complex and interlinked. And because it's global, it'll be interesting. And I'll end off with how do we approach this, and can we approach it? So circular economies are already impacting the food system, the climate, biodiversity, animal and human health, as well as energy use, water use, and land use. So it's again a very interesting time to consider all of these inputs and how we have been practicing our approaches and how we can improve. And so I'd like to think in a circular economy, we're considering the whole picture and not just maybe focusing only on food waste, but we're focusing on the entire inputs for the system. So for the past decade, we've been discussing food waste reduction as a larger sustainability theme to decrease many environment inputs across the entire food value chain. As I mentioned earlier, food waste is one of the big concerns or the big inputs within sustainability, and definitely within the circular economy approach. So we definitely want to move away from the take, make, and dispose model and do more of a circular economy. And so when we think, right now, if we have byproducts, it goes to animal feed, and that's okay. Well, why do we have so many byproducts? Why are we not catching this waste earlier on in the process? And so, right now, what we're doing is okay, but there's definitely areas that we can improve upon. So a circular economy, again, refers to something very much that it has circularity, and it's aimed at eliminating waste, but also a continual use of resources. And there's a Canadian group that's located physically in Guelph, but they also have, a lot of national presence. And so they had a report that came out in 2019, and 1/3 of our food is wasted. And from only surveying 50 Canadian food and beverage manufacturers, they did report that 9.3 million kilograms per year of food was wasted. So, and that, we talk a lot about consumers wasting food, but there's a lot of strategy and inputs that we can do on the processing side and the manufacturing side that can eliminate waste. And I just want to remind you, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Cheryl will be helping me in a couple more slides, and we'll be doing our first segment of the question and answer. So please feel free to start typing those questions in the Q&A box there. Thank you. So when we're looking at the circular economy in the food industry, it's the food system, it's the climate, it's biodiversity, it's animal and human health, it's energy and water use, it's land use. So when we think about the current food system, as I mentioned right now, it's pretty linear, farmer to retailer. It's a very linear process. We're looking at how do we make that not so linear, and how do we make, we decrease waste, we decrease energy use, we decrease land use. So much of our land right now is being used not only for human feed, but animal feed. So how do we strategize and make that more efficient? The climate, we've been talking about carbon footprint for quite a few years. I showed you that image of me on a California strawberry farm, and people talk about, we're getting tractor trailers of fruits and vegetables, and they're traveling miles. However, the consumer, that's also part of the consumer demand. The consumer in Canada, we commercially don't have the efficiencies or the capacity to grow strawberries 12 months of the year. The California strawberry growing season is almost 10 months. So, we have to look at the whole picture. We have to look at what consumers are demanding. We have to look at too the efficiencies. So when I was on the California farm, and I've been on many produce farms in Canada, and more, not our major grains, but more, strawberries and other crops that are minor. They just don't have the efficiencies and the streamlined approach. I mean, what they do in California is just incredible, how well they have it together, because it's a 10 months of the year business for them. So, if we want to continue to want as consumers exotic fruit in the middle of winter, and I call it exotic because we're not growing it here in the middle of winter at a commercial capacity that could feed our country, we have to look at efficiencies to decrease inputs. Biodiversity is another thing. So when we look at how we turn over our crops, how we abuse the soil, and how we don't replenish the soil, and then we rely on harsh chemicals to get the soil back in this nutritious format to grow healthy food or healthy crops. Again, it's another consideration. People want things instantly. People want things full time, food full time, and so. But if we don't, start looking at how we're abusing the land and the soil, we're going to be in trouble. So, same with animal health. We have industrial farms that are feeding people who maybe could not be able to afford proteins, for instance. So right now in Canada, the US, you can get protein, poultry, pork, at a fairly low price, so people who are at an economic disadvantage can purchase it. I purchase a turkey schnitzel from a vertically integrated farm at a retailer in Ontario, and I'm paying almost $10 for two pieces of turkey. And so not everybody can afford to do that. And so that's another consideration. It's great to talk about that, but we also have 1 billion people worldwide who are undernourished or not meeting their nutrients, and then we have 2.1 billion people overweight and obese. So lots to consider within this approach, and it's as I was putting the presentation together, it's so complex. It's one of the most complex systems out there within our industries. So again, the circular economy highlights looking at regenerative farming. So that's again putting nutrients back into the soil, not relying on harsh chemicals, eliminating waste and water and energy use throughout the process, continual use of resources. With the circular economy versus kind of sustainability. So as I mentioned, sustainability is more in isolation. It's really looking at public, private, and government or institution partnerships, and how to implement policies to make this work. And then also to consumer habits. So consumers have been used to a certain environment and availability, and will they be able to adapt? So our first question period. Cheryl, just wondering, are there any questions at this point?
Not yet.
Not yet. So I can give you like 20 to 30 seconds if anybody has any burning questions. There'll be another Q&A after this, but feel free to just write any questions that you have right now. Okay, so If there's no questions now, I will move on to the next segment. There won't be a Q&A at the end, so the next segment will be the last Q&A. I will wrap up with final thoughts. And then, of course, I am going to be at the SIAL virtual show today and tomorrow. So if there's any, if you need to get a hold of me through chat with the platform, or feel free at the end, I will give you my email if there's any additional questions. All right, so when we look at the global food system, again, it's highly complex and interlinked, and you can tell, from the way we've been talking so far, it is a very, very complex system. And that has really only developed over the past 100 years. So the system has transformed from local farms serving local markets. And so in a complex network, we now have, farmers, agribusiness stakeholders operating in a global marketplace, and to make all food available in all places always. And so, I've been talking about consumers, and sometimes they're talking at both sides of their mouth. They want a certain way, but then they want food available always in all places. And so it's, again, going to be a mind shift. But this transformation in our food industry has been really just over the past 100 years. So prior to that, you got kind of what you ate. Like, my mother was born in Nova Scotia, and she had availability to fish and to wild blueberries, and they had a pig in the backyard that was their summer pet, and then became their food for the winter. Whereas my dad, he was brought up in Ontario, and it was much different eating for them. So because they didn't have access to an ocean and maybe not such local farms, it was a little bit more urbanized. So we have transformed so much in the past, even in the past 70 years, 50 years. And so it's, again, going to take some change of mindset and change of approach if we're going to move to a circular economy. So right now we're in a very linear, we make, we purchase, and we dispose of. And that's, again, not just the food industry. We have a lot of waste in other industries, but definitely in the food industry, we have that. As we have found out, this is not as environmentally friendly as we would like it to be. There is waste throughout the system. So waste from processing, distribution, retail, home use, and again, we've seen with people spending more time at home with the pandemic, a little bit more thoroughness of what is in their cupboards, what is in their fridge, and how they're using it. And I hope that continues after we are not in such a social distancing state. And available and choice for low cost for consumers. So I'm going to harp on strawberries, but I can get US grown strawberries for $2.99 compared to Ontario grown strawberries for $5.99. And if money is a consideration, and right now we know because of the pandemic, if you're not a civil servant and you're not working for the government and you're in a for-profit business, a lot of them have been hit really hard, and they may not be able to afford the local, and they're actually going for something that has more volume and has been imported and is a lower cost. So the global pandemic and the global food system. So we've seen the need for resilience. So when I'm working with my B2B clients, my business to business clients, and when the pandemic hit, they might have been getting ingredients in from India, from China, and these ingredients are not available here in Canada. And so they not only could not get those ingredients, they had to be very adaptive, and they had to be very innovative on what could replace that. And then they also had to make decisions if they couldn't replace that, would they just continue that product? So definitely the need for resilience, and they improved shorter supply chain. And we also saw that in another industry with PPE, disinfectant. We saw really, really adaptive, resilient distilleries and breweries go from making what, beer and spirits to making alcohol sanitizers. And that, they moved quickly. And so I think that was a really interesting piece where when you have to move, you can move. And so, not that we've been lazy prior to the pandemic, and lazy is probably a bit of a harsh word, but we've been moving in a motion. Things seem to be working, and we just kind of didn't, poke the bear. We didn't really make change. And now that we're forced to, we can see how quickly businesses can adapt, businesses can innovate, businesses can pivot. And so hopefully, governments are able to collaborate at a decent level, and institutions are able to collaborate with these businesses that have the wherewithal that can pivot and can change. So we need improved, shorter supply chain. Obviously, if again, if borders are shut down or they're fragile, and we cannot get ingredients, and it is tricky because agriculture is a cycle. We can't just say, okay, we're out of quinoa from here, and okay, we need to have quinoa in Canada, and we haven't forecasted and planned for plotting it and growing it. So, this is, again, looking long term, what we can do to improve the supply chain. And again, of course, we're talking about, climate change, reducing energy, land, and water consumption for years, and it's more important than ever. So as I mentioned too, the public and private collaboration, and to de-risk and to stimulate this transition. So it's super important that when we're looking at stimulus packages, it's actually to de-risk it so that farmers and people along the chain, companies along the chain, will actually implement it. So when you go to do a risk assessment on sustainability in a food manufacturer, they actually see the understanding of the economics of it, and they see how it will stimulate and save them money long term. The key considerations, and we've been talking about this throughout the presentation, so biodiversity. And I was fortunate 2 years ago to be in Ireland and to see their regenerative farming, and it's much, Ireland's an island. They are kind of cut off from certain supplies, and so just to see the level of biodiversity on the smaller farms, and to see how they've done it, and to see that they're growing 20, 40 different types of grasses to feed their livestock for not only food but for wool and for other financial gains, and to see that shift was really interesting. In both our Canada and the US, it's different. We're a larger country, we're larger masses, we have bigger land masses, and also certainly different expectations. So consumers, again, are driving those demands and those expectations. When we look at animal and human welfare, so as I mentioned earlier, with industrial farming, we have that industrial farming that can feed the masses at a cheap price, but it also shines a light on how we treat those animals. And then human welfare. So I mentioned in the slide prior that we need to invest more in our workers. And we saw that right here in Canada with our migrant workers during the beginning of the pandemic, and how some of them were very well treated and some of them weren't. And then there were outbreaks on certain farms because of the policies and the procedures weren't accurately followed. So again, just another piece of the complexity, and to have everybody following the procedures, it is always going to be a challenge. And then energy and water use and land use. So as I mentioned earlier, water use, agriculture takes up a lot of water. Energy, it's not just, again, the carbon footprint at transportation, but it's throughout the entire chain. And how can we decrease the energy use throughout the entire gate to plate? And then land use, again, important piece. Yes, we need land to grow our agriculture, but we also have to treat it well to maintain it. And so then we don't have to use harsh chemicals to try to get it back. So the 4 steps towards a circular economy, and again, this is just, there's many more steps, but these are the ones I chose for this presentation. So closing the loops of nutrients and other materials. So as I said, if we're pushing crops, and if we're not treating our land properly, then the nutrients are not back in the soil, and then we've got soil that needs to be treated with other chemicals. And so the approach is short term. That's definitely not a long-term approach. And then other materials. So how do we look at fertilizers? How do we approach fertilizers? And how do we approach pushing our crops? And again, lots of consideration around that. Value from a byproduct. So again, waste is not just going back in for livestock feed. What else can we do with those byproducts? Prior to those byproducts, why are we getting so many byproducts? So what pieces and what steps prior to the waste can we change, and can we improve so we're not getting so many byproducts at the end? And the diversity of production. So looking at what we're producing, but what can we do to diversify that in the long term and in the short term? And I think it's really important right now, because we have the use of technology, we have the use of AI, we have the use of drones. This is really great to help us measure, to track, and how can we be more efficient by using technology? So that, again, the nutrients and other materials, so the soil health, the regenerative, I'm having problems with that word today, the regenerative agriculture, and then our alternatives to harmful chemicals. And so, people will say on a small scale, this is easy to do. Yes, we can. But on industrial farming, this is impossible. Well, is it impossible? And if we don't do it, where will we be with our industrial farming 20 years from now? So, maybe it's not 100% change at this point, which would be impossible, but what type of change can we do? What type of process can we do so that we can look at some short-term and long-term gains with our soil and also with our land use? So I think there was a question prior to, but we've got a few questions coming up, and we're going to have our next question period in the next few slides. So please feel free to ask any questions. Also, too, if there's topics that you want more information about, that will be good for both myself and the organizers of SIAL. So if there's anything that you think is valuable for future conferences, that would be a good statement from you as well. So value from byproducts, so recover, renew, and the bioeconomy. So as I mentioned earlier, making sure that you're dealing with as minimal byproducts as possible, but the byproducts you're dealing with, how are you recovering them? How are they renewable? And again, for our economy, to decrease as much waste as we can. So how do we put them back in efficiently back into the system? And the diversity of production. So we want shorter supply chains. So yes, we have a global economy, and yes, we are getting ingredients globally. But if we do have a situation like we have right now with the pandemic and things are fragile, what is plan B? is plan B, could plan B become plan A? It's an interesting question to think about. Obviously, we want to reduce inputs for the climate, energy, water, land, create local resilience. So I mentioned earlier about investing in employees. And so, I've been around the agriculture business for a while, and unfortunately, we have to get our migrant workers to come in. We've tried to support our own workers, and it's, I don't know if anybody has worked on a farm, and I can probably work for an hour and a half at 2 hours max on a farm. We're asking our workers to work 8-hour shifts, and currently our workers within Canada, even when it has been subsidized, are not as willing to do that work. So that's an interesting social question for our country, for sure. And we also want to reduce waste along the way and pay attention to animal welfare. Again, I remember, after my trip to Ireland and sitting around with friends and family and talking about how this farmer, how she treated her animal, her sheep, and then I talked about the lamb and how tender it was, and people were like, what? Like, they were very kind of like, when we're talking about how she was treating the animals, I said, well, that's the whole point, to treat the animals well so that you have a very high quality product in the end. So the whole animal welfare, we have to sometimes take some emotion out of it, and understand that we do have to treat them well, but they also are part of our feed supply for humans. And then again, investing in employees. So how do we get local people to work within the industry and stay within the industry? Because it is, a lot of the farm work is backbreaking. And so the use of technology was the fourth pillar that I'm talking about within the presentation. Again, there's more pillars to implementing a circular economy, but how do we use the technology and the benefits of it? So we can measure, we can track. It's very precision now. I mean, we can manage, we can do resource allocation, and definitely education around that. So I think there needs to be more emphasis put on how we can use technology for a more efficient system. So, Cheryl, how are we doing with questions?
Okay, we've got 3 questions.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one, do you feel sustainability is by itself engaging, or is it needed to translate into personal functional benefits?
That's a really, really good question. So once you can identify the gains personally, people are more apt to change their behavior, for sure. So sustainability is a buzzword, and it's definitely an area that can have more education around and engagement around, I think that's a good point. I think we have maybe not done a great job with engaging consumers and educating consumers around how the food system, and COVID has highlighted for many people who did not know where their food came from, and even people in the food industry. I'm often or related to the food industry, so within my own profession, I am trained as a dietitian. And if a dietitian has worked in a clinical setting, it's even interesting that they might not understand the full food value chain and how that works. So I think it's a really good point, not just on the consumer levels and on a personal level, but on all levels. And get those academics out to the field, get them on the farm for a day, and see how that translates. So I hope that answers your question. Can you give me the next question?
Yes. Okay. So do you think that COVID has caused people to be more conscious of what they are buying and where it comes from? And do you think that this behavior of buying local is going to continue after the pandemic is over?
Yeah, I think people are definitely more aware and conscious of where their food is coming from and even how their food is grown. So like we saw, for instance, with the pandemic, panic buying, people were buying a lot of ingredients for baking. And I write for Baker's Journal, as Beatrice said, and so certainly, you know, the whole interest in baking was somewhat surprising for me. But so once the retail packaging ran out, we started to see the industrial packing in our grocery store. So packages. So even that consumers were becoming more aware of. Okay, so they not only provide me a retail package, but this package is actually going to you know, a bakery, and so people have become definitely more aware. They, you know, they may feel the need to buy local right now, and our capacity for certain foods, we may not be able to provide. Certainly, you know, milk, eggs, grains, and that definitely yes, but any type of citrus fruit or anything like that, I mean, commercially we don't grow that here in our country to sustain a population of our size. So will they continue to do that? It's hard to say. I think they economically too, like again, this health crisis has caused economic disadvantage among people who you know, are maybe not working as much, or they're working differently. So I think it will also come down to price point. Yesterday in my presentation, I was talking about immune health, and we're seeing that people want to eat healthier. 30 to 36% of different studies across North America have seen and surveyed people saying that they want to eat healthier. So I would like to see people understanding the food system more and having more respect for not only farmers and workers, but the workers along the entire system, and how critical they are to our well-being. But I don't have the crystal ball. It'll be interesting. I think just that level of awareness is very helpful. Because I don't think consumers had that level of awareness. I think, you know, they were on autopilot going to the grocery store, demanding certain prices for certain foods and just going on their way. And I think there has been a pause to reflect. And I think that's a good thing.
Okay. The next question, a little bit of praise, a great presentation.
Thank you.
So when you think 10 years is out of all the things you chatted about, what is the one most important thing that farms should focus on to set up business in Canada for the future? And then the same question for manufacturers.
Yeah, so, and I think we're all guilty. If you've run your own business, and you're in business, and farmers are in business, manufacturers are obviously in business, we get, you know, reliant on a certain customer. So if they're our cash cow, and again, no pun intended, and then all of a sudden the border's closed and they're no longer our cash cow. So I think it's, you know, I think the pandemic has really given us opportunity to look at strategy and to look at different revenue streams. And so, and look at Canada as a revenue stream. You know, our population is small, which is tricky. And so if you're looking at large populated countries, but in a time of crisis like this, even a small cash cow is helpful. So how do we look at our own population, our demands of our own population, what they're willing to spend, you know, what are they eating right now? There's a huge emphasis on plant-based protein in Canada. We grow a lot of pulses, we grow a lot of seeds. You know, where is the emphasis? Where is the end market for those commodities? And not only the commodities, but how do we keep in Canada? How do we have in Canada commercialization using those commodities? And right now it's really small and mid-sized companies. So Canada is a tricky country because we're a large mass with a small population. But looking at that strategy and looking at maybe this is not our huge cash cow, but how do we do this and how do we maintain over the next 10 years, we see that millennials change their eating habits and their consumer behavior habits way more than my generation and the X's or baby boomers. So keeping up with demands, and I know it's tricky because of crop rotation and that, and if all of a sudden quinoa is really popular and we don't have the acreage of it that we had kind of predicted for. So I think it's farmers working with manufacturers, working with companies like myself that can help look at the trends, look at the better for you space. 10 years ago, trust me, the business I'm in, the better for you space was not as demanding as it is now. And it is mainly millennials and also Gen Zs living with their parents, asking their parents to buy certain foods. So looking in the crystal ball 10 years, it's a long way out. I would look at more like 5 years and then really focus on domestically. Maybe, again, it's not a huge population, but what can you do with the commodity and how can you commercialize that commodity into a value-added product?
Okay, the last question, how does composting fit into the circular economy model?
Yeah, composting is an interesting piece, and it certainly it is part of the piece, but how we dispose of that composting needs better attention because of the gases from that composting. So I'm not an expert in that piece of the puzzle. However, I know there needs to be more attention on it, on the disposal of it, and throughout the system. So even different regions, even different municipalities will treat composting differently, and there has to be a really efficient way on what happens to that compost after it leaves your facility or after it leaves your home.
Okay, and that's it.
Okay, great. So final insights. So I just wanted to present this slide, and I hope I can get through it, but it's in memory of a colleague who died suddenly on August 17th. And Ian and I have known each other for over a decade, and he was the co-founder of Global Food Alliances. And so, again, just because of COVID and just because of our traditional ways of mourning, there was not a large funeral, there was not a large announcement. And I just felt the need, both personally and professionally, to have this slide today. And I was part of the Global Food Alliance. And the whole idea, again, talking about a global economy, was to build networks to advance the global food industry. And this image of Ian and I was taken about this time last year, and my company created a pop-up harvest brunch and for my client Rogers Foods, which is a Canadian grain company. And Ian and his partner Mareg attended it, and he always had a smile, a great sense of humor. He was totally fun to be around, and I thought this image was very appropriate because. And I was going through a few images, but he's holding a plaque, and this was the selfie station. So, if people wanted to take selfies and Instagram or put on social media about what was happening at this pop-up harvest brunch to talk about how we were using the grains and the global goodness, or sort of the goodness of the grains and the sustainability factor of this company. So this company actually used local farmers, and they had a very very good relationship with their farmers growing the different grains. And so again, I just thought it was a good opportunity to talk, to recognize Ian, to recognize his work, and also say he was fun to be around, both personally and professionally. And as a business owner, you gravitate towards other people in a similar situation. So, somebody who else is running a business and who's also trying to network to advance the global food economy. And I think if you're in your own business, you're in your own business for a reason, and it's usually a passion, not just a paycheck, because we know the paychecks can, I call it either caviar or hot dogs. It can be one or the other, but you're in it because you just don't want to punch a button, get a banana, or get get some grains. You're in it to make a difference. And I really felt, Ian had that passion, and we will definitely miss you, Ian. So now my final insights. So looking at sustainability, so considering all inputs, and so not just, focusing only on waste, not just focusing only on the carbon footprint, looking at all inputs from the gate to the plate. And often, again, sustainability, and that was interesting, the question that did come up, is individual to businesses, farmers, or institutions. So we're not looking at the whole picture, and even, with the composting question, people are individually composting in their homes, companies are doing composting, but where does that composting go, and how is that composting being looked at globally? So sustainability is a great piece of the circular economy, but sometimes it's isolated, and that's my last statement. Improvements may be in isolation rather than impacting the entire food value chain or the entire value chain globally. So really, again, not to minimize sustainability and not to minimize companies out there that are helping with inputs and helping improvements and helping companies, save money with this. But ideally, and because we're in a global health crisis, it's just, again, a very good time to look at our global food value chain. And then insights with the circular economy. So looking at a circular economy is the entire food value chain that I've been harping on, and economies within it. Circular economies impact not only the food system, but the climate, the biodiversity, the animal and human health, energy and water use, as well as land use. And then again, the circular economy contrasts with the traditional linear economy. So right now we are in a take, make, and dispose. And so we want to transition out of that. But how can we transition out of that? And it includes, partnerships, looking at the prize, looking at the whole picture for public, private, and financial to steer towards a circular model. And the pandemic has shone the light on challenges of this linear food system, including the brittleness of some supply chains. And so, and again, it's not just within the food industry. We saw that in the medical supply industry with the pandemic. So very, very interesting how different industries pivoted to help different industries. But long term, looking at how can we implement both improvements for the circular practices to result in economic regeneration. And I don't feel the linear food system could last another year, 50 years. Hopefully it can last another year, another 50 years, or, how many other global health crises can it sustain? And so really improvements, not only short-term, but long-term are necessary. For this to happen, there needs to be a shift in mindset. So we need people looking at the long-term price. And again, that's our land, that's our energy use, that's our water use. And then longstanding industry practices have to shift. And, just when we're talking about our dietary practices, we know how hard it is I'm trying to give up coffee right now because with being at home so much, I'm drinking more coffee. And I know just even that shift is difficult. So when we're asking an entire global industry to change, I mean, that's huge. So there needs to be collaboration and policies that support this type of economy. And so we're looking at stimulus that can de-risk the transition from a linear. It's great to say, okay, yeah, me, as this industry, the pulse industry, for an example, let's do this. But if there's no de-risk for more farmers to start growing more pulses, why would they do that? So many pieces of the puzzle, many policies and transitions from what we've been doing for a long time, over 50 years and leading up 100 years, to now a circular model. And then, finally, can consumers adapt to price variations and also adapt to maybe getting things that they've been used to, that they're no longer as available? So lots of things to consider on how this would transition. And, I hope I've given you food for thought on this. And how can we work collaboratively, even within our own country, let alone globally? In the movie The Big Short, which was about the 2008 financial crisis, and I don't know if you remember it. I remember it because Brad Pitt was in it, and not just because he was in it, but certainly what his character said, the new economy is seeds. And at the time, I was toying about writing my book, and it was just around publication time, and so my book is more on seeds for consumption, but not seeds for sustainability. But it was interesting. It was an interesting piece within that movie that he said seeds are the new currency. So again, more food for thought on how we treat our entire food value system. And so again, my book is available on Amazon, and it's not on the agriculture side, but more on the consumption side. And then again, I want to thank you for your participation and your attention. You can connect with me at info@janedummer.com. I will be around the virtual trade show as well today and tomorrow, and I look forward to your questions and your interests. So please connect with me. And again, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jane, for all of these insights. It's always a pleasure to have you with us at SIAL Canada, and we're very lucky to have you with the virtual trade show as well this year. I would like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the SIAL TV YouTube channel, and also in the replay conferences in the menu section of the virtual platform. So again, thank you everyone for your time and for supporting SIAL Canada. Have a very great day and great visit of the trade show. Thanks again.
Thank you, Beatrice. And I want to thank Cheryl as well. Thank you, Cheryl, for helping.
Yes, thank you very much, Cheryl, as well. And Nicola, who's also there with us. Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.